This week we're looking at doers versus hearers, or hearers versus doers, in James chapter 1. It's a vivid description with some interesting language. Let's take a look. This is the ESV, James 1, verse 22. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. We're going to break this down into three parts because there's interesting stuff in all three parts. And let us begin. Gineste de poietai lagu. So the day is but, right? Gineste is an imperative of ginomai being used as a synonym for me. So continually be something. What's that something? Poietai, doers. Doers of the word, lagu in the genitive, of the word. So continually be doers of the word. This is a great word, doers, poietai. Poietai is the plural, the nominative plural noun. The singular is poietes. Poietes, we get our English word poet from. So what is a poet? A poet is a maker of rhyme, of structured storytelling. In the modern context, we think of poetry, some of us, Neanderthals such as myself, as roses are red and violets are blue, or, I think that I shall never see something quite as lovely as a tree. That's not old world poetry. Old world poetry is epic poetry. It's the Iliad. It's the tales of great Ulysses. It's the tales of Achilles. It's Atlas. It's the great Ajax. It's the great heroes and their deeds on the battlefields, kings and their mighty campaigns. So poetry had to do with the accomplishment of great deeds, and a poetes is a maker or a doer of a prescribed deed. We get our verb poieo, I do or I make from it, and it's a significant verb because it talks not just about the mundane things, but of doing miracles on behalf, by the hand of Jesus, etc. So poietes, we get poet from it, and here James says that what you want to be is, you want to be a doer, and someone who puts into action, lagu, doer of the word. So the word that you hear is supposed to be translated into action. And gineste, this present tense imperative, is saying that should be a continual and ongoing and always circumstance. Being a doer of the word that you've heard. Let's go on to the second part, compared to kaime monon akrotai. So here we have kaime and not, monon only, akrotai, hearers. So you have a contrast here. You can continually be doers of the word versus being only hearers. Those who hear it and do nothing with it, compared to those who hear it and act on it, right? Pretty great comparison. And that notion is borne out in the rest of the passage. But let's look at the third chunk, paralogizomenoi heautus, deceiving yourselves. So if you are hearers only, and not those who hear and do, who put into practice, hearers only are deceiving themselves. How so? Well, let's talk about grammar before we get into meaning here. So paralogizomenoi is a middle voice participle. And we've talked in recent episodes about the middle voice where one is acting on oneself. That the middle voice has a reflexive quality. It's something that I'm doing to or for myself. But here it's paired as the direct object with the reflexive pronoun heautois. And what we get when we put the reflexive pronoun as the direct object of a middle voice verb is what's called a redundant middle. The reflexive pronoun renders the middle voice redundant because the yourselves tells us that it's middle despite the middle participle. So we have this redundant middle. You have deceived yourselves is kind of the redundancy. But in a sense, it heightens that meaning. No one deceived you but yourself. The word didn't deceive you. The speaker didn't deceive you. You heard the message, and then what you did with it results in you deceiving yourself. Paralogizomai, from paralogizomai, para alongside, logizomai, I reckon, I consider, I take into account, I hold in mind, I think of something a certain way, I reason. If you put para on that, you're taking what you heard and you're setting it aside. In your mind, you've taken in information, but you've set it aside. So it's like, despite what I now know, I'm going to do this other thing. You can either be a hearer who then does, who hears and responds to with action, or you can be a hearer who sidecars that information and proceeds in a different way, right? There's an old saying, I don't know who originated it, but it goes, when you know better, you'll do better. Well, what James is talking about is the opportunity to know better by hearing the word, but then setting it aside in your mind and proceeding unaffected by what you've heard. Knowing better, but not doing better. Knowing better, but doing what you've always done or doing what you want to do, regardless of that input. Pretty fascinating stuff. So being a hearer who's not also a doer is shunting to the side what you've heard in favor of a different paradigm. You're setting up a parallel mind. And James uses this word, this participle, to call that self-deceit. When you're knowing better, but you're not doing anything, no less doing better. It's not affecting the way you live your practical life. Let's look at verses 23 and 24. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. So he says, a person who looks intently, in other words, a careful examination. A careful examination of what? He says, to prosopon tes geneseos autou, the face of his birth, the face he was born with. So nothing is more native to you than the face you were born with. You've had it since you were born. You've only ever had this one face, unless you paid some surgeon to do some freaky stuff to you. And so James says, being a hearer but not a doer is being like someone who looks carefully at their own reflection in the mirror, the face they were born with, and when they walk away, they don't have an idea of who they are, how soon they forget. And he uses this example of something that you're incredibly familiar with, something unbelievably native to yourself. How could you forget what you look like? How could you forget who you are when you turn away from the mirror and immediately have no idea, right? He says this is like that, something that should be native to you, something that should be highly significant, something that you should be virtually unforgettable, but you hear it, you shunt it to the side in self-deceit, walk away and live like you never heard it, right? That's this thing that he's saying. It's incredible. What is the point of being a hearer if you're immediately going to walk away and forget or ignore what you've heard, right? Then we get to verse 25. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts. Listen to that magnificent contrast Being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. Look at that great contrast. Hearing and not doing is like forgetting the face that you were born with. But the one who looks into the perfect law of liberty, and this is a great word, hoparakupsas, the one who bends over to carefully look at something, the one who stoops to examine something carefully, the one who doesn't give something a passing glance, but who studies it, who really wants to take in what it has to reveal, and then acts on it, the one who does that, who's not a casual observer, but looks into it and acts on it, that's the one, he says, will be blessed. It's fantastic, powerful stuff that James writes about this difference, isn't it? There's a funny thing in culture today, particularly in the political realm. We hear people talk about their significant convictions, morally, ethically, religiously, etc. And they immediately then say, but don't you worry, voters, I would never act on those convictions. You need to know that I'm a person of great moral courage and conviction. I'm a person who is a hearer of the word, but I would never think that there should be any bearing on what I do, how I conduct myself in office with that conviction. I think we could agree that from what we've read from James, James would think such statements to be nonsense. He would say, you're creating a parallel mind. You're a hearer of the word, but you're promising not to be a doer. It seems pretty weird. But forget about that. What do you think about this parallel, this contrast, I should say, of being one who hears and acts versus one who hears and immediately forgets? Let me know in the comments what you think, and until next time, Char Sky Reigning, you mean grace and peace to you.